Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. December 23rd fell on a Monday that year, and my wife packed the minivan while I watched from the living room couch, wrapped in 2 blankets and sweating through a fever that had started 4 days earlier. Kayla and the kids were heading to her parents' place in Wisconsin, a 6-hour drive that I normally dreaded, but now desperately wished I could make. Our daughter Lily, just turned 7, pressed her face against the front window and waved at me with both hands before climbing into her booster seat. My son Owen, barely 5, blew me a kiss that made my chest ache worse than the congestion. The flu had hit me like a freight train the week before Christmas, the kind where your bones feel like they're filled with concrete, and every cough tears something loose in your lungs. Kayla kissed my forehead, told me to rest and drink fluids, and promised they'd FaceTime me on Christmas morning when Lily opened her presents. I watched the red taillights disappear down Crescent Road around 4 in the afternoon, and suddenly our 2-story colonial felt enormous and hollow. That first evening alone passed in a haze of NyQuil and bad television. I managed to heat up some soup around 8, shuffled to the bathroom twice, and fell asleep on the couch, because climbing the stairs to our bedroom felt like scaling Everest. The house creaked and settled the way old houses do when winter temperatures drop, and I barely registered any of it through my medicated fog. Our neighborhood in the suburbs outside of Milwaukee was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked during the day and waved at each other from their driveways. We had moved there 3 years earlier, right after Owen was born, trading our cramped apartment for a house with a backyard and a 2-car garage. The block was mostly families with young kids and a few retired couples, the sort of street where nothing interesting ever happened. That night, I remember thinking how peaceful the silence was without the kids running around, how the only sounds were the furnace clicking on and the occasional car passing outside. By 11, I had dragged myself upstairs to the master bedroom, taken another dose of cold medicine, and collapsed into bed with my phone on the nightstand. What woke me was a sound that my fever-addled brain tried to explain away as a dream. A heavy thump somewhere below, like a package being dropped on the front porch. Christmas Eve was the next day, and we had been getting deliveries all week, so my first thought was that some overnight driver was dropping off a late shipment. I squinted at my phone, 2:47 in the morning, and figured I would deal with it tomorrow. But then came another thump, this one different, more like weight shifting on wood, and then a third sound that made me sit up in bed despite every muscle in my body screaming in protest. It was voices, muffled, low, but unmistakably human voices coming from somewhere outside the house. I told myself it was probably neighbors coming home late from a party, maybe struggling with their own holiday packages. The fever made everything feel distant and surreal, like watching a movie through a fogged window. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a moment, listening, my heart starting to beat faster despite my attempts to rationalize what I was hearing. The master bedroom sat at the back of the house, with 2 windows overlooking the backyard and the wooden fence that separated our property from the Nguyen's place behind us. I did not turn on any lights. Some instinct I cannot fully explain kept me in the dark as I moved toward the window. The blinds were partially open, the way Kayla always left them because she liked waking up to natural light. I pressed my face close to the glass and looked down into the yard, and what I saw made every symptom of my illness vanish in a single instant of pure, crystalline terror. 3 figures dressed in dark clothing were climbing over the back fence, one already dropping into our yard, while the other 2 straddled the top. They moved with practiced coordination, no wasted motion, no hesitation. One of them pulled out a flashlight and swept the beam across the back of our house, pausing on the sliding glass door that led to the kitchen. I pulled back from the window so fast I nearly tripped over the nightstand, my breath suddenly loud and ragged in the silent bedroom. These were not neighbors. These were not delivery drivers. These were men breaking into my home in the middle of the night, and I was completely alone. My phone was still on the nightstand, and I grabbed it with fingers that felt numb and clumsy, like they belonged to someone else. I dialed 911 and pressed the phone to my ear, keeping my voice as low as physically possible when the dispatcher answered. I whispered our address, told her there were 3 men breaking into my house right now, that I was sick and alone and unarmed. She asked me to stay on the line and told me officers were being dispatched, but her voice sounded impossibly far away, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking somewhere downstairs, followed by the scrape and click of the sliding door being forced open. They were inside. The dispatcher was saying something about staying hidden, about not confronting them, but I was already moving toward the bedroom closet because it was the only place I could think of. Our closet was a walk-in, not huge but deep enough that I could press myself into the back corner behind Kayla's winter coats. I slid the door shut as quietly as I could manage, leaving it open just a crack so I was not in complete darkness. From inside that closet I could hear everything with terrible clarity. Footsteps on the hardwood floors downstairs, heavy and unhurried, moving through the living room and into the kitchen. Then a voice, male, speaking just loud enough that the words drifted up through the heating vents that connected every room in the house. Clear the first floor fast, then upstairs. Families in Wisconsin until the 26th. I saw them pack the car. Another voice responded, younger sounding, almost eager. What about the alarm? The first voice laughed, a short, humorless sound. No alarm. These neighborhoods never have real security, just those fake signs in the front yard. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making any sound, my whole body trembling not from fever now, but from something far more primal. They knew. They had watched us. They had seen Kayla and the kids leave, had noted our habits, had probably driven past our house a dozen times over the past week waiting for this exact moment. This was not random. This was planned. The dispatcher was still on the line, her voice a tinny whisper from the phone I had pressed against my thigh to muffle any sound. I could hear her asking if I was still there, if I was safe, but I could not risk answering because the footsteps had reached the bottom of the stairs. There was a pause, a murmured conversation I could not make out, and then the creak of the first step. They were coming up. I had maybe 30 seconds before they reached the second floor, before they started opening doors, before they found the master bedroom and the closet where I was hiding like a child afraid of monsters. Except these monsters were real, and they were methodical, and I had nothing to defend myself with except a bottle of NyQuil and a box of tissues. The phone screen glowed faintly against my leg, and I watched the call timer tick upward, 4 minutes and 12 seconds since I had dialed. The dispatcher had said officers were on their way, but our suburb was not exactly a high-crime area. Response times could be 10 minutes, 15, maybe longer on a holiday week when half the force was on vacation. The footsteps reached the top of the stairs and stopped. I heard one of them breathing, a thick, wet sound like he had a cold of his own, and then a flashlight beam swept under the crack of the closet door, moving left to right across the bedroom carpet. "Check the kids' rooms first," the older voice said, and the footsteps moved away down the hall toward Lily's room with its purple walls and stuffed animals. I heard the door open, heard someone rummaging through drawers, and then a different voice, the third man who had not spoken before, called out something about jewelry and a laptop. They were professionals. They knew exactly what they were looking for, knew which rooms to hit, knew how to move through a house quickly and efficiently. The closet suddenly felt impossibly small, the winter coats pressing against my back like hands trying to push me forward. I could smell Kayla's perfume on one of her jackets, a scent that usually comforted me, but now made me want to scream because it reminded me of everything I stood to lose if these men found me hiding in the dark. Then the bedroom door opened. The hinges made a soft whine that I had been meaning to fix for months, and now that tiny neglected chore felt like a death sentence announcing my location. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the bed with its rumpled sheets, across the nightstand with the half-empty glass of water and the bottle of cough syrup. I held my breath so completely that my lungs started to burn. my vision going spotty at the edges from lack of oxygen and pure concentrated fear. Footsteps crossed the carpet, moving toward the bathroom first. I heard the shower curtain being pulled back, the medicine cabinet opening and closing. "Nothing in here," the younger voice called out. "Check the closet," the older one responded from somewhere in the hallway, and I felt every muscle in my body lock up tight. This was it. There was nowhere else to hide, no escape route, no weapon within reach. I was going to be found by men who had broken into my home expecting it to be empty, and I had no idea what they would do when they discovered they were wrong. The closet door started to slide open, and in that moment I did something I still cannot fully explain. Maybe it was the fever, maybe it was some desperate survival instinct, but I started coughing. Not quietly, not trying to suppress it. I let loose with the worst, most wretched hacking cough I could produce, the kind that sounded like tuberculosis and pneumonia combined. The door stopped moving. I kept coughing, adding a wet gurgling sound that came naturally given how congested I actually was, and then I heard the younger voice say something sharp and panicked. "Someone's in there! Someone's sick in there!" There was a commotion in the hallway, whispered arguing, and then the older voice cut through with authority. "Leave it, we got enough, let's move." The closet door slid shut again, and I heard footsteps retreating fast down the hallway, down the stairs, and then the slam of the back door. I kept coughing even after they were gone, unable to stop now that I had started, my whole body convulsing with the effort as tears streamed down my face. The police arrived, 11 minutes after I had first dialed, which meant they missed the intruders by maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I was still in the closet when I heard sirens, still clutching my phone with the 911 call at 17 minutes, and counting. 2 officers came through the broken back door with their weapons drawn, calling out and identifying themselves, and I finally managed to croak out that I was upstairs, that I was the homeowner, that the men were gone. They found me sitting on the closet floor surrounded by winter coats, shaking so badly that one of them thought I was having a seizure. The paramedics they called checked my vitals and said my fever had spiked to 103, probably from the stress and adrenaline. They wanted to take me to the hospital, but I refused, because I could not stand the thought of leaving my house empty again, even with police tape on the back door. An officer stayed with me until morning while detectives processed the scene, dusting for fingerprints and photographing the damage. They had taken my laptop, Kayla's jewelry box, some cash from my desk drawer, and Owen's piggy bank that had maybe $40 in quarters. I called Kayla at 6 in the morning and told her what happened, and she drove back that same day with the kids, cutting their trip short by 3 days. We installed a real security system the week after Christmas, cameras and motion sensors, and an alarm that connects directly to the police department. The detectives caught 2 of the 3 men about a month later. They had been running the same operation across 4 counties, targeting houses where families had visibly left for the holidays. The younger one, the one whose panic at my coughing probably saved my life, was only 19 years old. He told the police that they specifically looked for signs that homeowners were traveling. Cars loaded with luggage, piled up mail, dark windows at night. They had watched our house for a week before deciding it was safe. What they never counted on was a sick husband staying behind. I still think about that night sometimes, especially during the holidays when the house gets quiet and I hear sounds I cannot immediately explain. That closet is just a closet now, full of clothes and shoes and normal everyday things. But every time I open the door, I remember what it felt like to hide there in the dark, listening to strangers move through my home, waiting to be found. My co-workers used to joke that I was the last person who would ever get into trouble. Quiet, responsible, always the designated driver at happy hours. That was me at 24, fresh out of college and working my first real corporate job at an insurance firm in Richmond, Virginia. I had been there for about 18 months when the 2016 holiday season rolled around, and our manager Gloria booked a private room at this upscale Italian place downtown for our Christmas dinner. I remember spending an hour doing my makeup that night, wearing my nicest black dress, the pearl earrings my grandmother left me, and feeling like I had finally arrived somewhere in life. The restaurant had exposed brick walls, dim Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling, and this gorgeous marble bar that made you feel important just by standing near it. I was so focused on having a good time, on fitting in with people I admired, that I never once considered anything could go wrong. 9 years later, I still get a knot in my stomach every time office holiday parties come around, because what happened after that dinner changed the way I move through the world forever. The dinner itself was perfect, almost annoyingly so in retrospect. Our group of about 15 people laughed, exchanged white elephant gifts, and drank way too much red wine for a Wednesday night. Gloria, this fierce woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her hair and a laugh that filled entire rooms, kept refilling my glass and telling embarrassing stories about difficult clients. By 10:30, most of us were tipsy and warm from the alcohol. That kind of buzzing happiness where everything feels soft around the edges. People started leaving in small groups around 11, calling Ubers and saying long goodbyes in the cold December air out front. I stayed until almost midnight talking to a guy from accounting named Peter, this tall redhead with a gap between his front teeth, who always made me laugh with his terrible puns. When I finally decided to leave, the temperature had dropped significantly, and a bitter wind was cutting through the street like a blade. Instead of walking around the block to where I had parked my car, I made a decision that still haunts me. I figured I would cut through the alley behind the restaurant to save myself 2 minutes in the freezing cold. The alley was darker than I expected. The back of the restaurant had a single floodlight above the kitchen door, but it only illuminated a small circle near the dumpsters, leaving the rest of the passage in deep shadow. I could see the glow of the street on the other end, maybe 50 feet away, and I told myself it was fine. My heels clicked against the wet pavement, echoing off the brick walls in a way that made me suddenly aware of how alone I was. I pulled my coat tighter and walked faster, my breath forming little clouds in front of my face. I was maybe 15 feet into the alley when I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, deliberate, closing the distance. Before I could even turn around, a hand clamped over my mouth from behind and another grabbed my wrist so hard I felt the bones grind together. Someone dragged me sideways, and my ankle twisted as I stumbled, one of my heels snapping clean off. I tried to scream, but the hand pressed harder, and I could taste leather and something metallic, like the person had been handling coins. They shoved me behind the dumpster, into a space that smelled like rotting food and stale grease. A man pressed me against the cold brick wall, his face inches from mine, and in the dim light I could make out a ski mask with holes cut for his eyes and mouth. He was breathing hard, and I could smell cigarettes and something sour on his breath. His grip on my wrist was crushing, and he kept his other hand firmly over my mouth. I heard another voice from the entrance of the alley, low and urgent. Another one from the office party, hurry before more come out. That sentence hit me like a punch to the chest. Another one. They had been waiting, watching us leave the restaurant one by one, picking off whoever wandered away from the group. This was not random. This was not bad luck. These men had planned this, had studied us through the window as we laughed and drank, knowing exactly what they were going to do when we stumbled out into the night. The man holding me yanked at my purse strap so hard it burned across my shoulder before snapping. I heard the contents spill somewhere on the ground, my lipstick rolling away, keys jingling against concrete. He shoved the purse at someone I could not see, and then his hands were on me again, pulling at my coat, patting my pockets. When his fingers found my phone in my jacket, he ripped it out and tossed it behind him. Then he saw my earrings, my grandmother's pearls. He reached for my ear and I did something I did not plan, something that came from a place of pure animal instinct. I bit down on the hand covering my mouth as hard as I could. I tasted blood, felt skin tear between my teeth, and the man screamed and jerked his hand away. For 1 second, maybe 2, his grip loosened and I twisted sideways and started to run. I made it 3 steps before something hard hit the back of my head and the world tilted sideways. I hit the ground on my hands and knees, my palms scraping against broken glass and gravel, pain shooting up my arms. Someone grabbed a fistful of my hair and pulled my head back. The man I had bitten was cursing, calling me names I will not repeat, and I could see blood dripping from his hand onto the pavement. The other one, the lookout, had come into the alley now, and he was younger than I expected. I caught a glimpse of acne scars on his chin below the edge of his mask. He kept looking back toward the street, nervous, bouncing on his feet. "Just get the jewelry and let's go," he hissed. "Someone's gonna come." The first man yanked my head back further and tore one earring out of my ear. The pain was blinding, white hot, and I felt blood running down my neck into my collar. I screamed then, a real scream that echoed off the walls, and the younger one panicked. He grabbed the first man's arm and pulled him toward the back of the alley. Leave it, we gotta go." They took off running, disappearing through a gap in a chain-link fence I had not even noticed was there. And suddenly I was alone, kneeling in garbage and broken glass, bleeding and shaking in the dark. I do not know how long I stayed there. It could have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. Time had become something fluid and unreliable. Eventually, I managed to get to my feet, using the dumpster to pull myself up, and I stumbled toward the street on one broken heel. My ear was throbbing, blood soaking into the collar of my dress, and I could feel something warm running down my scalp where I had been hit. When I reached the sidewalk, the world seemed too bright, too loud, even though the street was nearly empty. A couple walking their dogs saw me and the woman gasped, pulling out her phone immediately. I must have looked like something out of a horror movie. Mascara streaked down my face, blood on my neck and hands, my coat torn and dirty. The man took off his jacket and wrapped it around my shoulders, asking me questions I could barely process. Someone called 911. Someone else ran into the restaurant to get help. And then Gloria was there, her face pale and terrified, holding my hands and telling me I was going to be okay, that help was coming, that I was safe now. The police arrived before the ambulance. 2 officers, a man and a woman. And they asked me to describe what happened while we waited for the paramedics. I told them everything I could remember, the ski masks, the voices, the phrase about the office party. The female officer's expression changed when I mentioned that. She stepped away and spoke into her radio, and when she came back, she asked me the name of the restaurant and how many people had been at our dinner. I found out later what she had already known. I was the 3rd person attacked that night. A woman named Sandra from our marketing department had been mugged 2 blocks away around 11:15, walking to her car after saying goodbye to everyone. A man named Craig from IT had been jumped near the parking garage at 11:45, beaten badly enough to need stitches above his eye. 3 attacks in less than an hour, all targeting people leaving the same Christmas party. The paramedics loaded me into the ambulance as this information sank in, and I remember staring at the ceiling of that vehicle, thinking that none of this felt real, that I would wake up tomorrow, and it would all have been some terrible wine-fueled nightmare. At the hospital, a nurse cleaned the wound on my ear where the earring had been ripped out. She told me I was lucky. The lobe had torn, but not completely, and it would heal with proper care. Lucky. The word made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. A doctor examined my head, said I had a mild concussion, and told me to have someone wake me every few hours through the night. Gloria stayed with me the whole time, sitting in that plastic chair by the bed, texting updates to our co-workers. Around 3 in the morning, a detective came to take my full statement. His name was Franklin, a tired-looking black man in his 50s with gray at his temples and kind eyes that had seen too much. He told me what the police had pieced together so far. A crew of at least 4 people had been targeting corporate holiday parties downtown for the past 2 weeks. They would scout restaurants with private event rooms, watch the guests through the windows, note the jewelry and expensive coats, and then wait outside for people to leave drunk and alone. They had hit 6 different parties before ours, but this was the first night they had gotten aggressive enough to physically hurt anyone. Something had escalated. Maybe they were getting desperate, or maybe they had just stopped caring about consequences. Detective Franklin asked me if I could identify any of them, and I told him about the acne scars on the younger one's chin, the cigarette smell on the other's breath, the specific way the first man had cursed when I bit him, a slight accent I could not quite place, maybe something Eastern European. He wrote everything down in a small notebook, nodding slowly. Before he left, he gave me his card and told me they would be in touch. I spent the rest of that night at Gloria's apartment because I could not stand the thought of being alone. Her husband made us tea and sat quietly in the living room, while Gloria helped me wash the blood out of my hair in her bathroom sink. I kept catching glimpses of myself in the mirror, the bruise forming on my temple, the bandage on my ear, the hollowness in my eyes, and I did not recognize the woman looking back at me. That confident girl who had done her makeup so carefully just hours before, who had felt so proud of her little black dress and her grandmother's pearls. She was gone. Something had been taken from me in that alley, something beyond the purse and the phone and the jewelry, and I did not know if I would ever get it back. The police caught them 11 days later. Detective Franklin called me on a Saturday morning to tell me that a pawn shop owner had recognized one of my grandmother's earrings, the one they had managed to take, from the description circulated to local businesses. The man who tried to sell it matched the details I had given: stocky build, cigarette smell, and when they pulled him in for questioning, they found bite marks on his hand that were still healing. He gave up his partners within hours trying to cut a deal. There were 5 of them in total, not 4. 2 brothers from Belarus who had overstayed their visas, a local guy with a long record of petty theft, and 2 younger men who served as lookouts and scouts. They had made over $40,000 in 3 weeks hitting holiday parties across the city, preying on people who were too drunk and happy to be cautious. The younger one with the acne scars, a 19-year-old named Victor, actually cried during his arrest and kept saying he never wanted anyone to get hurt. I did not feel sorry for him. I did not feel sorry for any of them. When the assistant district attorney called to tell me they had all taken plea deals and would be serving between 3 and 8 years depending on their level of involvement, I felt something loosen in my chest that I had not even realized was tight. It has been 9 years since that night, and I wish I could say I moved on completely, but that would be a lie. I still do not take shortcuts through alleys. I still get nervous at office parties, always positioning myself near the exit, always watching who comes and goes. The scar on my earlobe faded to a thin white line that most people never notice, but I see it every morning when I put on earrings. Never pearls, not anymore. Gloria retired 2 years ago and we still meet for coffee once a month. She never brings up that night unless I do first, but I know she thinks about it too. Last December, my company had its holiday dinner at a restaurant with valet parking and a security guard at the door, and I caught myself scanning the street outside, looking for anyone who might be watching us through the glass. I know that fear will probably never go away entirely, and I have made peace with that. What happened in that alley taught me something I carry with me now. The world is full of people waiting for you to let your guard down, and sometimes the most dangerous moments come wrapped in celebration and warmth. I survived. Sandra and Craig survived. And every December when the party invitations start arriving, I remind myself that survival is enough, that I am still here, still standing, still refusing to let those 5 minutes in the dark define the rest of my life. Corporate training conferences have a special way of draining your soul, and after 6 straight days of fluorescent lights and PowerPoint slides about logistics optimization, all I wanted was to get home before Christmas. My company had scheduled this regional meeting at our Spokane satellite office with 0 consideration for the fact that some of us would need to cross mountain passes in the dead of winter to get back. I worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company based in Salt Lake City, one of those jobs you fall into after college when your art history degree turns out to be worth less than the paper it was printed on. My graduating class had scattered across the country chasing careers, and here I was 10 years later, spending more time on highways than in my own apartment. That Friday morning, I threw my overnight bag in the back of my Subaru Outback, grabbed the largest coffee the hotel lobby offered, and pointed myself toward Interstate 90 heading south. The December sky hung low and gray, pregnant with snow that the weather app swore would hold off until I was safely through the passes. I believed that little green checkmark more than my own gut, and that choice haunts me still. The first few hours passed without incident, just me and the hum of the heater. A true crime podcast filling the silence as I watched Montana unfold through my windshield. I stopped for gas outside Missoula, standing in a parking lot so cold that my breath crystallized the moment it left my lips, and texted my roommate Jenna that I should roll in around 9 or 10 that night. She responded with a row of Christmas tree emojis and promised her famous spiked hot cocoa would be waiting, the kind with cayenne pepper that warms you from the inside out. I remember smiling at my phone, picturing myself on our worn leather couch with a mug in my hands and my cat Oliver purring on my lap. The highway began its slow climb after Helena, the landscape transforming from flat brown farmland into dense pine forests blanketed in white. The mountains out there have a way of making you feel utterly insignificant, like civilization is just a thin veneer that nature tolerates, but could shrug off at any moment. I drove in silence after a while, the podcast abandoned, watching the trees blur past and the road narrow, completely unaware that within 2 hours I would be speeding through ice and darkness, while 3 men sprinted after my car with intentions I still cannot bring myself to fully imagine. The pass I needed to cross was called Lolo, and if you have ever driven it in winter, you know exactly why my stomach tightened as the elevation climbed. The road twists and curves along cliff edges, hugging the mountainside with guardrails that look like they were installed sometime during the Eisenhower administration. Snow had been plowed to the sides, forming walls of dirty white that narrowed the lanes and limited visibility around every bend. I slowed to about 40 miles per hour, my knuckles pale against the steering wheel, watching for black ice on the asphalt. The few cars I had seen earlier seemed to have vanished, and I realized I had not passed another vehicle in at least 20 minutes. Cell service had dropped to nothing somewhere around the last switchback, my phone showing that useless no service message that feels like a death sentence when you are alone in the mountains. I told myself this was fine, that thousands of people drove this pass every winter without incident, that I just needed to focus and take it slow. The shadows from the pines stretched long across the road as the afternoon light began its early winter fade, and I remember thinking how easy it would be to disappear out here, how long it might take anyone to find you. I came around a blind curve doing maybe 35, being extra cautious because the road had started to descend, and I could feel my tires losing grip in patches, when I saw the black SUV parked on the narrow shoulder about 200 feet ahead. Its hazard lights blinked orange against the gray afternoon, and I could see a man standing beside the driver door, waving both arms above his head in that universal gesture of distress. He wore a dark jacket and jeans, and even from that distance I could tell he was looking directly at my approaching headlights. My first instinct, the one drilled into me by years of being a woman who travels alone, was to keep driving. Do not stop for strangers on empty mountain roads, especially when your phone does not work and the nearest town is 40 minutes behind you. But then another thought crept in, the guilty one, the one that whispered about how I would feel reading a news story tomorrow about some poor man who froze to death on Lolo Pass while cars drove by without helping. The temperature outside was hovering around 15 degrees. If his car had broken down, if he had been out there for hours already, he could genuinely be in danger. Slowed down even more, my mind racing through options, and in that hesitation, I made the decision that nearly cost me everything. I pulled onto the shoulder about 30 feet behind the SUV, leaving my engine running and my headlights on because something in the back of my brain was still screaming at me to be careful. The man started walking toward my car immediately, his gait quick and purposeful despite the icy ground, and I noticed he was not shivering at all. That detail registered somewhere deep in my consciousness but did not fully surface until later. He was maybe mid-40s, with a weathered face and a thick beard that had patches of gray near his chin. I cracked my window about 2 inches, just enough to hear him but not enough for a hand to fit through, and called out asking what was wrong. He leaned down to my window level, close enough that I could see his breath fogging the glass, and said his battery had died and his phone was dead too. Asked if I had jumper cables or could give him a ride to the next town. His voice was calm, almost too calm for someone who had supposedly been stranded in freezing temperatures. I was about to tell him I had cables in my trunk when movement in my peripheral vision made every nerve in my body fire at once. Two figures stepped out from behind the SUV, one from each side, and they were walking toward my car with a speed that had nothing to do with asking for help. The one on the left was carrying something long and metal, a crowbar or a tire iron. I could not tell which, and it did not matter. The one on the right was already at my back door before I could even process what was happening, and I heard the handle click as he yanked it hard. Thank God I had locked my doors automatically when I started driving that morning, a habit my father had drilled into me since I was 16. The man at my window changed completely in that instant, his calm demeanor evaporating into something predatory and cold. He shoved his arm through the gap I had left open, trying to reach the lock or grab my hair, I do not know which. I screamed something, probably just a raw sound of terror, and slammed my foot on the gas pedal without any thought beyond escape. My tires spun on the ice for one horrifying second where nothing happened, where the world seemed to pause and let me understand exactly how trapped I was. Then they caught, and my car lurched forward so violently that the man at my window stumbled backward and fell onto the road. I heard shouting behind me, angry male voices, but I did not look back. I just drove, fishtailing wildly on the frozen asphalt, my entire body trembling so hard I could barely keep the steering wheel straight. The next 10 minutes are a blur of adrenaline and terror that I have tried to piece together dozens of times since. I remember glancing at my rearview mirror and seeing the SUV's headlights flicker on, which meant they were coming after me. The road ahead was nothing but curves and ice and darkness creeping in from the edges of the forest, and I had to make a choice between driving fast enough to stay ahead of them and driving slow enough to not wrap my car around a tree. I pushed the speedometer to 50, then 55, feeling my back end slide with every turn while my headlights carved pale tunnels through the growing dusk. At some point I started crying, not sobbing but just tears streaming down my face while I whispered please, please, please like a prayer to no one. The SUV's headlights appeared behind me on a straight stretch, maybe a quarter mile back, and I watched them grow larger in my mirror as they closed the distance. They knew this road better than I did. That much was obvious. They knew exactly where to position themselves, exactly which curves would force a good person to stop, and they probably knew exactly how to run someone off a cliff and make it look like an accident. I do not know how long the chase lasted, whether it was 5 minutes or 15, but I remember the exact moment it ended. The road curved sharply to the left, and then opened up into a wider stretch where the trees pulled back from the shoulder. And sitting there like a mirage was a pickup truck with a camper shell parked at a scenic overlook. An older man in an orange hunting vest was standing outside the truck, a cigarette glowing between his fingers as he watched the last light fade over the mountains. I laid on my horn as I approached, a long, continuous blast that made him spin around in alarm, and I pulled off the road so fast that I nearly clipped his front bumper. The SUV behind me did not stop. It flew past the overlook doing at least 60, disappearing around the next curve without even tapping its brakes. I threw my car into park and just sat there, hyperventilating, unable to move as the hunter walked toward my window with a confused and concerned expression on his weathered face. When I finally managed to roll down my window and speak, what came out was barely coherent, just fragments about men and a crowbar and them trying to get into my car. He listened without interrupting, his eyes scanning the road behind me, and then he said 4 words that confirmed I had not imagined any of it. "You are not the first." His name was Gene, and he had lived in the area for over 30 years, hunting elk and mule deer in these mountains since before I was born. He told me to stay in my car with the doors locked while he grabbed his rifle from the truck, not because he thought they would come back, but because he wanted me to feel safe. Once he was standing beside my window with a scoped hunting rifle cradled in his arms, he explained what he knew. There had been 4 other incidents on this stretch of road in the past 2 months, all of them following the same pattern. A black SUV with hazard lights, a man waving for help, and then multiple attackers emerging once someone stopped. 2 of the victims had been carjacked and left stranded in the freezing cold. One of them a mother with 2 kids in the back seat who had to walk 3 miles in the snow before finding help. Another victim, a man traveling alone, had been beaten badly when he tried to fight back, his wallet and phone stolen, his car taken and later found burned out on a logging road. The police knew about it, Jean said, but the passes covered multiple jurisdictions, and the attackers never stayed in one spot long enough to be caught. They picked blind curves where drivers had to slow down, places where guilt would override caution, where the human instinct to help someone in trouble became a trap. I sat in my car at that overlook for almost an hour, waiting for my hands to stop trembling enough to drive. Jean refused to leave until he was sure I was okay, standing guard with his rifle while the temperature dropped and stars began to appear in the darkening sky above us. He let me use his satellite phone to call the county sheriff, and I gave a statement right there on the side of the road, describing the 3 men, the SUV, the license plate I had not thought to memorize because I was too busy trying not to die. The deputy on the phone sounded tired but not surprised, and he confirmed what Jean had told me. This crew had been hitting the passes all winter, moving between locations, always targeting solo drivers who looked like they might stop for someone in distress. They asked if I wanted to press charges if they caught them, and I almost laughed at the question. Of course I did. These men had turned basic human decency into a weapon, had exploited the part of us that wants to help strangers, and they had almost certainly done worse things to other people than what they tried to do to me. Before he hung up, the deputy told me something I have never forgotten. He said the woman with the 2 kids, the one who had been carjacked, she only stopped because her son had pointed at the man waving and asked why no one was helping him. She told the police she could not drive past after that, could not let her children see her ignore someone who needed help. Jean followed me down the mountain that night, his headlights a steady presence in my rearview mirror for the next 40 miles until we reached a town with cell service and a gas station, bright enough to feel like civilization again. I hugged him in the parking lot, this stranger with a rifle and a cigarette habit who had probably saved my life just by being in the right place at the right time, and he told me to drive safe and stay smart. I made it home to Salt Lake City around midnight, 6 hours later than I had planned, and Jenna was still awake waiting for me with that spiked hot cocoa she had promised. I did not tell her what happened until the next morning because I could not find the words that night, could only sit on the couch with Oliver purring against my chest and stare at the Christmas tree lights blinking in the corner of our living room. She cried when I told her. I cried too, not from fear anymore, but from the strange delayed realization of how close I had come to becoming one of those stories people share around campfires, one of those unsolved mysteries that haunts a stretch of highway forever. 3 weeks later, I got a call from the sheriff's office telling me they had caught the men responsible. An off-duty state trooper had spotted the SUV setting up on a different pass and called it in, and when they ran the plates, it matched a vehicle reported stolen 2 states away. All 3 of them had warrants, long histories of robbery and assault, and one of them was wanted in connection with a missing persons case from the previous spring that was still open. I still drive through mountains when I have to, but something fundamental changed in me after that day on Lolo Pass. I keep my doors locked and my windows up. I never stop for strangers, no matter how guilty it makes me feel, and I carry a satellite communicator in my glove box now for emergencies. Sometimes I wonder about the person they were waiting for after me, whether anyone else stopped that evening before the sun went down completely, whether someone out there was not as lucky as I was. I think about that mother and her kids walking through the snow, about the man who got beaten for trying to fight back, about all the people whose basic goodness was weaponized against them by men who saw compassion as nothing more than opportunity. The worst part is not the fear that lingers, though that is bad enough. The worst part is knowing that a small piece of my faith in humanity got left behind on that frozen road, and I am not sure I will ever get it back. I used to be the kind of person who stopped to help strangers, Now I am the kind of person who drives past and hates herself for it. And every time I see someone on the side of the road with their hazard lights on, waving for help, I feel that war inside me all over again. The guilt pulling one way and the memory of those 3 men pulling the other. And I press the gas pedal a little harder and whisper an apology to whoever they are, real or not, and I keep driving. My buddy Corey and I had been sneaking through the Norfolk Southern freight yard since middle school. By December of 2018, we had graduated from Eastbrook High about 6 months prior and were both stuck in that weird limbo between teenage freedom and actual adulthood, working part-time jobs and figuring out what came next. The yard sat on the edge of our town in eastern Tennessee, a sprawling maze of rusted tracks and forgotten rail cars that nobody seemed to care about anymore. We used it as a shortcut to get from the warehouse district where Corey worked to my neighborhood on the other side. It shaved about 20 minutes off the walk compared to going around on the main roads. That particular night, the first Saturday of December, Corey had finished his shift around 11 and texted me to meet him at our usual spot near the old signal tower. The temperature had dropped to maybe 30 degrees, and our breath came out in thick clouds as we walked between the long rows of freight containers. Holiday lights from the shopping center about a mile away cast this faint orange glow over everything, making the yard look almost peaceful in a strange way. We were maybe halfway through, passing a section where they kept the older boxcars that rarely moved, when Corey grabbed my sleeve and pulled me down. At first I thought he was messing around, but then I heard it too. Voices carrying across the cold air, way too close for comfort. This was unusual because the yard security rarely patrolled this deep, and the homeless folks who sometimes sheltered in the empty cars never talked that loud. We crouched low and duck-walked between 2 rusty grain hoppers, pressing ourselves against the cold metal wheels. From there, we could see a clearing about 50 yards ahead where a string of boxcars sat on a side track. 3 trucks were parked beside them, big unmarked panel vans with their headlights off but engines running. I counted at least 8 figures moving around, all wearing dark clothes and what looked like ski masks or balaclavas. My first thought was that we had stumbled onto some kind of drug deal, which would have been bad enough. But then the side door of one of the boxcars slid open, and everything I understood about the world shifted in a way I still cannot fully explain. 2 men climbed into the boxcar while a third held a flashlight from outside. The beam swept across the interior, and I saw them. People, maybe 6 or 7 of them, slumped against the walls like discarded mannequins. They were dressed in thin clothes completely wrong for December weather, and none of them were moving on their own. One by one, the men started dragging them out, carrying them like sacks of grain toward the waiting vans. Corey's hand found my arm in the dark, his fingers digging in so hard I knew there would be bruises later. We both understood immediately that this was not a drug deal. These were human beings being loaded into vehicles against their will, and the way their heads lolled and their limbs hung limp told me they had been drugged or sedated somehow. I remember the cold metal of the rail car wheel pressing into my back, the smell of diesel and rust, and this horrible feeling of helplessness spreading through my chest. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to call someone, to do something, but my body refused to cooperate. The men worked fast and efficient, like they had done this many times before. They communicated in short bursts, hand signals and whispered commands in a language I could not identify. One of them kept checking his phone, the screen glow briefly illuminating a face that looked weathered and impatient. A woman was passed from the boxcar to the ground, and I noticed her feet were bare despite the freezing temperature. Her hair hung over her face in tangled clumps, and her arms showed dark marks that could have been bruises or dirt. It was hard to tell from where we hid. By now, they had transferred maybe 5 people into the first van, stacking them inside with zero regard for comfort or dignity. I wanted to believe I was dreaming, that I had fallen asleep at home and this was some kind of nightmare fueled by too many crime documentaries. But the cold was too real, the sounds too sharp, the fear too immediate. This was happening 20 feet away from us, and all Corey and I could do was watch and pray they did not look in our direction. That is when one of them woke up. A young guy, maybe around our age or a little older, suddenly jerked his head up as two men were carrying him toward the second van. His eyes went wide, and for a split second he seemed completely disoriented. Then pure animal terror took over. He thrashed so hard that he slipped from their grip and hit the gravel on his hands and knees. The men shouted, and the young guy scrambled to his feet and started running. He made it maybe 15 feet before one of the masked figures caught up to him, tackling him from behind with a brutal efficiency that made my stomach turn. I heard the impact, this wet thud of bodies hitting frozen ground, followed by muffled screaming as they pinned him down. Another man jogged over carrying what looked like a syringe, and within seconds the screaming stopped. They picked him up again, limp as before, and continued loading him into the van like nothing had happened. The whole incident lasted maybe 30 seconds, but those 30 seconds burned themselves into my memory with perfect clarity. Corey was breathing so fast I thought he might pass out. I pressed my hand over his mouth, not to silence him, but to ground him somehow, to remind him that we needed to stay invisible. My own heart was slamming against my ribs like it wanted to escape my chest. The young man who had tried to run, I kept seeing his face in that brief moment of consciousness, the way recognition and horror had flooded his features simultaneously. He knew exactly what was happening to him. He knew he was being taken somewhere terrible, and his body had summoned every last ounce of strength to fight back. And it had not mattered. They had caught him in seconds, sedated him again, and now he was just another unconscious body in the back of a van. I thought about my phone, still in my jacket pocket, and how I should be recording this or calling 911. But my brain kept replaying what they had done to that kid, how fast and how ruthless, and I understood with horrible certainty that if they found us hiding here, we would end up in one of those vans too. The whole operation took maybe 20 minutes from when we first hid to when the last van door slammed shut. One of the men walked around the boxcar with a flashlight, checking the ground and the surrounding area. For one terrible moment, the beam swept toward the grain hoppers where we crouched, and I felt Corey stop breathing entirely. The light passed over us without pausing, but I swear it grazed the edge of my sneaker. Then the man turned back, said something to his companions, and climbed into the passenger seat of the lead van. The engines revved, and all three vehicles pulled away slowly, their headlights still off as they navigated through the freight yard toward a service road on the far end. We did not move. We stayed pressed against those cold wheels for what felt like an hour, but was probably closer to 10 minutes, waiting to make sure they were truly gone and not circling back. The silence that followed their departure was somehow worse than the sounds of what we had witnessed. A heavy, accusatory quiet that seemed to ask why we had not done anything to help. When we finally crawled out from our hiding spot, my legs had gone numb from crouching so long in the cold. Corey vomited against the side of a rail car, this raw heaving sound that echoed across the empty yard. I stood there watching him, my mind still trying to process what had just happened. Neither of us spoke as we made our way home, taking a different route that kept us far from the section where the transfer had occurred. I kept looking behind us, checking shadows, listening for engines. Every car that passed on the main road made me flinch. When I finally got home around 1 in the morning, my mom was asleep and the house was dark. I went straight to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the wall for maybe 2 hours. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that young man trying to run, saw him hit the ground, saw the syringe. I knew I needed to tell someone, but I had no idea how to explain what we had seen without putting ourselves in danger. Corey called me the next morning, his voice hoarse and shaky. He had not slept either. We talked in circles for almost an hour, going back and forth about what to do. Part of me wanted to go straight to the police, tell them everything, and let them handle it. But Corey pointed out that we had been trespassing when we saw it, that we had no proof, no photos, no license plates, just the word of 2 teenagers who had been cutting through private property at midnight. And there was something else neither of us wanted to say out loud. If these people were organized enough to move human beings through a freight yard like cargo, they were probably organized enough to find out who reported them. We decided to wait a few days, see if anything came up in the news, and then figure out our next move. It was a coward's decision, and I knew it even then. But fear has a way of making cowardice feel like common sense. 4 days later, it was all over the local news. The county sheriff held a press conference announcing that 7 people had been reported missing over the past 2 weeks, all from small towns within a 100-mile radius. Most of them were undocumented immigrants, people who had come looking for work and had no family nearby to notice when they vanished. But one of them was a kid named Marco Delgado, 19 years old, who had been a senior at Eastbrook High the year before Corey and I graduated. I remembered him vaguely, a quiet guy who played trumpet in the marching band and always wore this beat-up denim jacket with patches sewn on the sleeves. When they showed his photo on the news, my entire body went cold. It was him, the young man who had woken up, who had tried to run, who had been tackled and sedated right in front of us. I recognized his face instantly, the shape of his jaw, the way his hair fell across his forehead. Marco Delgado had been 15 feet away from me, fighting for his life, and I had done nothing but hide. That same night, Corey and I went to the police station together. We told them everything: the freight yard, the boxcars, the vans, the masked men, Marco trying to escape. The detective who interviewed us, a tired-looking woman named Russo, listened without interrupting and took notes in a small spiral notebook. She asked us to describe the men, the vehicles, anything we could remember about markings or sounds or smells. We gave her every detail we could recall, which turned out to be a lot more than I expected. Trauma has a way of burning things into your brain whether you want it to or not. When we finished, Detective Russo told us we had done the right thing by coming forward, that our information could help them piece together a larger investigation already underway. She also warned us not to discuss what we had seen with anyone else, not to go back to the freight yard, and to call her directly if we noticed anything unusual. The way she said that last part, if we noticed anything unusual, made it clear that she understood the kind of people we were dealing with, and that our safety was not guaranteed just because we had talked to the cops. The investigation took months, and we were not told much about how it progressed. What I know came from news reports and a brief follow-up meeting with Detective Russo about 3 months later. Federal agents had gotten involved, tracing the trafficking ring across 4 states. They made arrests in Georgia and North Carolina, shutting down a network that had been operating for at least 2 years. Some of the victims were recovered alive, found in labor camps and illegal operations scattered across the Southeast. But Marco Delgado was not among them. His case remains open, listed as a missing person with no confirmed status. I think about him more often than I probably should. That brief moment when he woke up, when he fought back, when he almost made it. I wonder if things would have been different if Corey and I had called 911 right then. If we had been braver, or smarter, or less afraid. I will never know the answer to that, and I have learned to live with the weight of not knowing. What I do know is that some nights, especially in early December when the air gets cold and sharp, I still hear the sound of engines idling in the dark, and I remember what it felt like to witness something terrible and do nothing at all. Syracuse gets dark early in winter, and I mean dark. By 4:30 in the afternoon, the sky already looks like someone pulled a curtain over the whole city, streetlights flickering on while most people are still finishing their shifts. I worked at a warehouse distribution center on Lakeview Road, sorting packages and loading trucks until my back screamed for mercy, and every evening I walked 6 blocks to catch the 547 bus on Caldwell Avenue. The stop itself was nothing special, just a metal shelter with a cracked plastic bench, wedged between an abandoned dry cleaner and a storage facility surrounded by chain-link fence. Most of my coworkers had cars, waving goodbye from the parking lot while I zipped up my jacket and started the walk. Having graduated high school back in 2011, I always thought my life would look different by now, but there I was, riding public transit in the freezing cold, saving every dollar for an apartment with radiators that clanked and groaned like something was trapped inside the walls. I first noticed the car on a Wednesday, the first week of that month. A dark blue sedan, older model, maybe a Ford Taurus or something similar, parked across the street from the bus shelter with its engine off. Someone sat behind the wheel, just a shape against the faint glow of a phone screen. I barely registered it at first. People wait in parked cars all the time for 100 different reasons. Picking up family members, killing time, avoiding conversations at home. I checked the transit app on my phone and saw 7 minutes until arrival, so I stamped my feet to keep warm and watched my breath form little clouds that vanished into the cold air. When I looked up again, the silhouette inside the sedan had shifted. The person was no longer looking at their phone. Their head was turned toward the bus shelter, toward me, just sitting there motionless behind the glass. A delivery truck rumbled past and blocked my view for a moment, and when it cleared, nothing had changed. Same car, same figure, same unsettling stillness. I told myself it was nothing, and got on the bus when it arrived, forgetting about the whole thing before I even reached my stop. Thursday came and went without incident, mostly because I had to stay late for inventory, and missed my usual bus by almost an hour. By the time I reached Caldwell Avenue, the street was emptier than usual, the cold keeping everyone indoors, and the sedan was nowhere in sight. I remember feeling relieved without fully understanding why, like some part of my brain had flagged that car as a problem even though I had consciously dismissed it. Friday was different. I left work at my normal time, walked the same 6 blocks, and there it was again. Parked in the exact same spot across the street. Same dark blue sedan, same tinted windows, same figure behind the wheel. This time the engine was running, a thin trail of exhaust curling up into the frozen air, and the headlights were off even though the sun had already set. I stood under the bus shelter and pretended to scroll through my phone, but my eyes kept drifting back to that car. The figure inside did not move, did not check their phone, did not do anything except sit there facing my direction. 5 minutes passed, then 6. I could feel my pulse in my throat, which sounds dramatic, but you have to understand how isolated that bus stop was. No pedestrians, no other cars, just me and that sedan, and the buzz of a failing streetlight above my head. The bus finally arrived and I climbed on fast, tapping my transit card without looking back. I found a seat near the middle and glanced out the window as we pulled away from the curb. The sedan had not moved. But right before we turned the corner, I saw something that made my chest tight. The driver's side door had cracked open, just a few inches, like whoever was inside had been about to get out. The interior light did not turn on, which meant they had disabled it, and that detail stuck with me for the rest of the night. Why would someone disable their dome light unless they did not want to be seen? I told myself I was being paranoid, that I watched too many crime documentaries, that this was just some random person with a broken car light. But when I got home to my apartment, I locked the deadbolt and the chain, something I had not done in months. I even pushed my small kitchen table against the door, feeling ridiculous the whole time but unable to stop myself. That night I barely slept, staring at the ceiling and listening to the radiator clank, while my mind replayed the image of that door cracking open in the darkness. Saturday and Sunday offered a break from the routine, and I spent most of the weekend convincing myself that I had exaggerated the whole situation. By Monday morning, the fear had faded into something more like embarrassment. I even laughed about it while making coffee, shaking my head at how easily I had let my imagination spiral out of control. Just some guy waiting for someone, probably annoyed that I kept staring at his car like a paranoid freak. I went to work with a lighter mood, joking around with my coworker April during our lunch break, telling her about the creepy sedan as if it were a funny story instead of something that had kept me awake for 2 nights. She laughed and said I had been watching too much true crime, which is exactly what I needed to hear. The day passed quickly, and by the time 5 o'clock rolled around, I had almost completely forgotten about the whole thing. Almost. because when I stepped outside the warehouse and started walking toward Caldwell Avenue, I felt a small knot form in my stomach, a tension I could not fully explain. The sun was already gone, the sky a deep purple bleeding into black, and the temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since morning. I saw the sedan before I even reached the bus stop. Same spot, same position, same dark blue paint catching the glow of the distant streetlight. My steps slowed without me deciding to slow them, my body reacting before my brain could catch up. The engine was running again, that thin wisp of exhaust floating up into the cold. And this time I noticed something new. The passenger side window was down about 2 inches, despite the freezing temperature outside. I kept walking because stopping felt worse somehow, like it would confirm that I was afraid, that I had a reason to be afraid. When I reached the shelter, I did not sit on the cracked plastic bench. I stood near the edge closest to the street, positioning myself where I could see the sedan clearly and where the bus would block me from view as soon as it arrived. The figure behind the wheel was there, same as before, just a dark shape that never seemed to move. But then something changed. A sound cut through the quiet, faint but unmistakable. A car door opening. Not all the way, just that initial click and creak of hinges. I looked directly at the sedan and saw the driver's side door push outward a few inches, then stop. Whoever was inside was testing something, maybe checking if I would react, maybe waiting to see if anyone else was around. I pulled out my phone and pretended to make a call, holding it to my ear and speaking to no one on the other end. I said things like, "Yeah, I'm at the bus stop now, and okay, see you in a few minutes," hoping that whoever sat in that sedan would hear me, would think someone was expecting me, would decide I was not worth the risk. The door stayed cracked open the entire time, neither closing nor opening further, and I could feel eyes on me even though I could not see them through the tinted glass. My heart was pounding so hard I worried the person might somehow hear it across the street. 2 minutes until the bus, according to my app. I kept the fake conversation going, laughing at nothing, nodding along to silence, doing everything I could to seem like a person with connections, with people who would notice if something happened to me. A car drove past on Caldwell Avenue, and the sedan door clicked shut, fast and quiet, like a reflex. I watched the blue car sit there motionless again, engine still running, and I understood something clearly for the first time. This was not random. This was not coincidence. Someone had been watching me, learning my schedule, waiting for the right moment when the street was empty enough and the darkness thick enough to do whatever they were planning to do. The bus arrived and I practically threw myself through the doors, scanning my card and walking straight to the back where I could see out the rear window. As we pulled away, I watched the sedan. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the headlights flicked on, and the car slowly pulled out of its parking spot. It did not follow the bus, not exactly, but it drove in the same direction, turning left where we turned left, maintaining a distance of about half a block. I pressed my face closer to the glass, trying to see the license plate, but the angle was wrong and the streetlights too dim. The sedan followed for 3 more blocks before it turned off onto a side street and disappeared. I sat back in my seat, breathing hard, trying to process what had just happened. When I got off at my usual stop, I did not walk straight home. Instead, I went into the convenience store on the corner and stayed there for 20 minutes, pretending to browse the aisles while watching the street through the window. No blue sedan, no one suspicious. Just the normal flow of evening traffic and pedestrians bundled up against the cold. I bought a bag of chips I did not want and finally walked home, checking behind me every few steps until I reached my building. That night I called my older brother Jeff, who lived about 40 minutes away in a suburb outside the city. He worked as an electrician and had that practical, no-nonsense attitude that made me feel stupid for even bringing it up. But I told him everything anyway. The sedan, the figure behind the wheel, the door cracking open, the way the car had followed the bus. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished, which surprised me because I expected him to tell me I was overreacting. Instead, he asked me specific questions. What color was the car exactly? Did I notice any dents or stickers or anything distinctive? What time did I usually get to the bus stop? Had I noticed anyone else being watched? I answered as best I could, and when I finished, he told me to start taking pictures. Document everything, he said. Get the license plate if I could. And most importantly, he told me to call the police and file a report, even if they could not do anything right away. Having something on record mattered, he explained, in case things escalated. I promised I would, and after we hung up, I sat on my couch feeling a strange mix of validation and terror. My brother had taken me seriously, which meant this was serious, which meant I was not imagining the danger I felt every time I stood at that bus stop alone in the dark. I called the non-emergency police line the next morning before work and explained the situation to an officer who sounded tired but not dismissive. She took down the details, the location, the description of the car, the times I had seen it, and told me they would make a note in their system. She also suggested I vary my routine if possible, take a different bus, get picked up by someone, avoid being alone at that stop during the evening hours. I thanked her and hung up, feeling slightly better but also frustrated. Vary my routine. Easy to say when you have options, when you have a car or flexible hours or someone who can drive you. I had none of those things. My shift ended at 5 every day. The 5:47 was the only bus that got me home at a reasonable hour. And asking Jeff to pick me up every evening was not realistic. So I went to work, did my job, and when 5 o'clock came, I walked toward Caldwell Avenue with my phone already in my hand, camera app open, heart beating faster with every step. The sedan was there. Same spot, same silence. But this time, I was ready. I raised my phone and took 3 pictures in quick succession, zooming in on the license plate as much as I could without the image turning into a blurry mess. The figure inside the car must have noticed because the sedan suddenly pulled forward, not fast but deliberate, rolling out of the parking spot and down the street away from me. I kept taking pictures as it moved, capturing the rear of the vehicle, the shape of the taillights, anything that might help identify it later. My hands were steady even though everything inside me was screaming. The car turned right at the end of the block and vanished from sight, and I stood there under the bus shelter feeling like I had won something small but important. I had proof now. I had evidence that this was real, that someone had been watching me, that I was not crazy. When I got home, I emailed the photos to myself, saved them to my cloud storage, and sent copies to Jeff along with a message explaining what happened. He replied within minutes telling me to send everything to the police as well, which I did. The officer I had spoken to earlier called me back that evening and said they would run the plates and see what came up. She sounded more interested now, more alert, and she asked if I could come into the station the next day to give a formal statement. I agreed without hesitation. Wednesday morning, I went to the police station before my shift and sat across from a detective named Howell, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and reading glasses that she kept pushing up her nose. She showed me a photograph on her computer screen and asked if I recognized the vehicle. It was the blue sedan, no question, and I told her so immediately. She nodded and then told me something that made the room feel smaller. The car belonged to a man named Ronald Pratt, 47 years old, no permanent address with a record that included assault, harassment, and a previous arrest for attempted abduction in another state 8 years ago. He had been released on parole 2 years prior and had recently been spotted in multiple locations around the city, always near bus stops, always during the early evening hours when the sun went down and the streets emptied out. I was not his only target, she explained. 3 other people had filed similar reports over the past month, all describing the same car, the same behavior, the same feeling of being watched and tested. The detective thanked me for coming forward and for the photos, which had given them the clearest image of his plates they had received so far. She told me they were actively looking for him now, and she advised me to stay vigilant until they made an arrest. For the next 4 days, Jeff picked me up after work. He would pull into the warehouse parking lot at 5:15, and I would climb into his truck and feel something close to normal for the 20 minutes it took him to drop me home. I hated needing help, hated feeling like I could not handle my own life. But I also knew that pride was not worth dying over. The bus stop on Caldwell Avenue stayed empty those evenings, at least from what I could see as we drove past. No blue sedan, no figure watching from behind tinted glass. Maybe Pratt had moved on to another part of the city. Maybe he knew the police were closing in and decided to lay low. I checked the local news obsessively, scrolling through articles on my phone during lunch breaks and before bed, waiting for something, anything that would tell me this nightmare was over. On Sunday night, I finally found it. A short article buried in the crime section reported that a man had been arrested near a bus stop on the east side of Syracuse after a witness called 911 to report suspicious behavior. The suspect, identified as Ronald Pratt, was taken into custody without incident and was being held on multiple charges including stalking, harassment, and violation of parole. The article mentioned that police believed he was connected to a string of incidents targeting individuals at isolated transit stops throughout the city during the early weeks of December. I read that article probably 15 times before I let myself believe it was real. Jeff called me that night after seeing the same news, and neither of us said much, just sat on the phone in silence for a while, breathing, processing. I went back to taking the bus the following Monday. Same route, same time. Same cracked plastic bench under the flickering streetlight. The sedan was gone. The parking spot across the street sat empty. Just a patch of asphalt where something terrible had almost happened but did not. I still think about those evenings sometimes, standing alone in the cold while someone watched me from behind dark glass, calculating, waiting. I think about how easily things could have gone differently, how one night without witnesses or one delayed bus might have changed everything. People always say to trust your instincts, and I used to roll my eyes at that kind of advice, but not anymore. My body knew something was wrong before my brain caught up, and the only reason I am writing this now instead of being another name in a news article is because I listened. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything. Tell someone. Do not let anyone make you feel stupid for being afraid. Fear kept me alive, and I will never apologize for that. Divorce has a way of making you crave silence. After 18 months of lawyers, arguments, and dividing everything from furniture to friendships, the idea of spending Christmas week completely alone felt less like loneliness and more like a reward. My co-worker Denise practically begged me to join her church potluck, and my landlord even mentioned a community dinner at the recreation center, but I turned down every invitation without a second thought. The townhouse complex where I lived sat on the outskirts of Tucson, one of those newer developments where every unit looked identical. Beige stucco walls, terracotta roof tiles, and a tiny backyard barely big enough for a grill and 2 lawn chairs. My place was the last unit on the east side, which meant I only shared one wall with my neighbor, an elderly man named Howard, who spent winters visiting his daughter in Seattle. His place had been dark and empty since early December. The unit across the small parking lot belonged to a young couple who had loaded up their SUV on the 22nd and driven off to spend the holidays with family somewhere in Texas. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, I was essentially alone in my little corner of the development, and that suited me just fine. The first 2 days of my vacation passed exactly as I had planned. Lazy mornings, long baths, and enough chocolate to put myself into a pleasant sugar coma. My graduating class from northern Arizona had scattered across the country years ago, so there was nobody local expecting me anywhere, nobody checking in, nobody wondering what I was doing at any given moment. December 23rd fell on a Monday that year, and I had taken the entire week off from my job at the insurance agency downtown. The main cluster of townhouses sat about 200 feet away from my unit, separated by a row of decorative desert landscaping and a curved walking path. I could see their Christmas lights twinkling in the distance from my kitchen window, but they felt miles away from my quiet little corner. That night, Christmas Eve, I made myself a simple dinner of pasta and garlic bread, poured a generous glass of Merlot, and settled onto my couch to watch some cooking competition show. The temperature outside had dropped into the low 40s, which counts as freezing by Arizona standards, and I remember feeling grateful for my thick wool socks and the blanket draped across my lap. The house was warm, the wine was good, and for the first time in almost 2 years, I felt something close to peace. The cooking show had just ended, and I was debating whether to open a second bottle of wine or call it an early night when I noticed the living room get slightly darker. It took me a moment to realize what had changed. The soft glow from my outdoor Christmas lights, the ones I had strung along the front porch railing, had disappeared. I glanced at the clock on my cable box and saw it was just past midnight. Officially Christmas Day now. My first thought was that the timer had malfunctioned, but I distinctly remembered setting it to stay on until 2 in the morning. I figured a fuse must have blown, which would not have surprised me given how old the electrical panel in these townhouses was. I grabbed the small flashlight I kept in my kitchen junk drawer and headed toward the front door, already mentally cursing the inconvenience of having to dig through the utility closet in the dark. But as I passed by the front window, I stopped. Through the gap between my living room blinds, I could see the parking lot bathed in the pale yellow glow of the complex street lamp. And crossing through that light, moving slowly along the front of my townhouse, was a shadow. At first, my brain tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone from the main cluster of townhouses was taking a late-night walk, or perhaps a neighbor I did not know had come home for the holiday after all. But the shadow stopped directly in front of my window. Just stood there, a dark silhouette against the faint light, completely motionless. I could not make out any features through the blinds, just the general shape of a person, tall and broad-shouldered, facing my unit. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I backed away from the window slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, and pressed myself against the wall next to my bookshelf. The rational part of my mind kept insisting there had to be an innocent explanation, that I was overreacting because of the wine and the late hour, and the fact that I had been watching too many true crime documentaries lately. But something deep in my gut, some ancient instinct that exists in all of us, was screaming at me that this was wrong. I stood there in the darkness of my living room, barely breathing, watching that shadow through the thin gaps in my blinds, waiting for it to move, to leave, to do anything except stand there staring at my home. The figure remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, but was probably closer to 2 or 3 minutes. Then, without any warning, it moved. Not away from my townhouse, but around the side, disappearing from my line of sight toward the narrow alley that ran between my unit and Howard's empty place. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it was a homeless person looking for shelter, or a drunk who had wandered into the wrong complex, or even some teenager playing a stupid prank on Christmas Eve. I told myself to calm down, to think rationally, but my body refused to listen. I crept through my living room toward the back of the house, staying low, keeping away from the windows. My townhouse had a small back patio with a sliding glass door that led out to the tiny yard, and beyond that was nothing but empty desert scrubland and a wooden fence that marked the edge of the property. I had always loved that fence because it gave me privacy, but now all I could think about was how isolated I was back here, how far away from the other units, how nobody would hear me if I screamed. I reached the kitchen and peered around the corner toward the back door, straining my ears for any sound from outside. That is when I heard it, the soft metallic click of someone testing the handle on my back door. Not a knock, not a voice calling out, just the slow, deliberate sound of the handle being pushed down and released, over and over again. I pressed my hand against my mouth to keep from making any noise, and watched the handle move in the dim light that filtered through the kitchen window. The motion was patient, almost rhythmic, and I realized with horror that whoever was out there was timing their attempts with the sound of cars passing on the main road about a quarter mile away. Every time a vehicle drove by, Creating that low hum of tires on asphalt the handle would turn. They were using the noise to mask what they were doing, which meant this was not some confused stranger or random drunk. This was someone who had thought about this, planned this, someone who knew exactly what they were doing. My phone was on the coffee table in the living room, and the distance between me and that phone felt like miles. I waited for another car to pass, and when the handle turned again, I used the sound to cover my footsteps as I moved back toward the living room as quietly as I could. I grabbed my phone from the coffee table and immediately dialed 911, my fingers trembling so badly that I had to try twice to hit the right numbers. The operator picked up after 2 rings, a woman with a calm professional voice who asked me to state my emergency. I whispered as quietly as I could, telling her someone was trying to break into my house, giving her my address, explaining that I was alone. She asked me to stay on the line and assured me that officers were being dispatched, but then her voice changed. It dropped lower, more urgent, and she told me something that made my entire body go cold. She said she needed me to stay very quiet because there was background noise on my call, breathing, heavy and close like someone was listening in on another line. For a moment I did not understand what she meant. I only had one phone, a cell phone, and I was the only person in the house. Then the realization hit me like a punch to the chest. Whoever was outside had somehow accessed my call, was somehow hearing everything I was saying to the dispatcher. The operator whispered for me to move to the most secure room in my house and barricade the door, to not say another word, to just listen for the sirens. I ended the call against her instructions because I could not stand the thought of that breathing on the line, of him hearing my location, my fear, everything. I ran to my bedroom at the back of the townhouse and locked the door behind me, then dragged my heavy wooden dresser in front of it with a strength I did not know I possessed. My bedroom had one window that faced the backyard, and I made sure the blinds were completely shut before I crouched down in the corner between my bed and the closet. The silence in the house was suffocating. I strained to hear any sound. Footsteps, the handle turning again, glass breaking, but there was nothing. Just the distant hum of the occasional car on the main road and the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. Minutes passed, each one stretching into what felt like hours. I kept checking my phone, watching the time crawl forward, wondering how long it would take for the police to arrive in this remote corner of the city on Christmas morning. Then I heard something that nearly stopped my heart, a scraping sound, slow and deliberate, coming from the front of the house. It was not the sound of someone trying to force a door open. It was lighter, more controlled, like metal against wood. The scraping continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped, then started again, then stopped. The pattern repeated 3 or 4 times before everything went silent once more. I sat in that corner, arms wrapped around my knees, praying for the sound of sirens. The sirens came about 12 minutes after I had hung up, though it felt like I had aged a decade in that time. I heard the cars pull into the complex, saw the faint flash of red and blue lights through my bedroom blinds, and finally allowed myself to breathe. There were voices outside, loud and authoritative, calling out commands and announcing their presence. I stayed in my room until I heard a knock on my front door, and a man identifying himself as Officer Hartley with the Tucson Police Department. Even then, I made him slide his badge under my bedroom door before I would move the dresser and come out. He was a tall man in his 50s, with a gray mustache and kind eyes that immediately made me feel safer. His partner, a younger woman named Reeves, was outside examining the perimeter of my townhouse with a flashlight. Officer Hartley sat me down on my couch and asked me to walk him through everything that had happened, and I told him all of it. The lights going out, the shadow at my window, the handle turning in rhythm with the passing cars, the breathing on the phone line. He listened without interrupting, taking notes in a small leather pad, his expression growing more serious with each detail I shared. Officer Reeves came inside a few minutes later, and the look on her face told me she had found something. She asked Officer Hartley to step outside with her, and through my front window I watched them examining my porch with their flashlights, crouching down, pointing at things I could not see from where I sat. When they came back inside, Officer Hartley sat down across from me and told me what they had discovered. The outdoor Christmas lights had not blown a fuse. Someone had deliberately unscrewed the bulbs, carefully enough that none of them were broken, just loosened in their sockets so they would not turn on. Along the doorframe of my back door, they had found fresh scratch marks in the wood, deep grooves that suggested someone had been trying to pry the door open with some kind of tool, maybe a flathead screwdriver or a crowbar. The scraping sound I had heard from my bedroom was likely the same person working on my front door. Officer Reeves said the marks were methodical, not frantic, which indicated someone who knew what they were doing and was taking their time. They asked me if I had any enemies, any ex-partners who might want to harm me, anyone who had been bothering me recently. I thought of my ex-husband immediately, but he had moved to Chicago 8 months ago and had no reason to come back. The officers stayed with me for over an hour, taking photographs of the damage, dusting for fingerprints, and canvassing the empty units nearby for any sign of the intruder. They found footprints in the soft dirt behind my backyard fence, size 11 work boots based on the tread pattern, leading out into the desert scrubland and disappearing about 50 yards from my property. Whoever it was had parked somewhere out there in the darkness, walked in on foot, and vanished the same way when the sirens approached. Officer Hartley explained that this kind of behavior, the careful planning, the timing with traffic noise, the methodical approach to entry, suggested someone who had done this before. He did not say the word serial, but I could see it in his eyes, the way he and Reeves exchanged glances when they thought I was not looking. They offered to have a patrol car sit outside my complex for the rest of the night, and I accepted without hesitation. Before they left, Officer Reeves pulled me aside and said something that has stayed with me ever since. She said I was lucky that I had noticed the lights going out. Lucky that I had looked through the blinds at that exact moment. Lucky that I had called when I did. She said most people in my situation would have just gone to check the fuse box outside, would have walked right out their front door into the darkness without a second thought. The implication was clear. If I had done that, I might not be standing here talking to her. I did not sleep that night, or the next night, or the one after that. I stayed with Denise from work for the rest of the holiday week, too terrified to set foot in my townhouse alone. In January, I broke my lease and moved to a gated apartment complex on the other side of the city, closer to downtown, where there were people and lights and noise at all hours. The police never caught whoever was outside my home that Christmas Eve. They found a partial fingerprint on one of the loosened light bulbs, but it did not match anyone in their database. Officer Hartley called me a few times over the following months to check in, and during one of those calls, he mentioned that there had been 2 similar incidents in the area over the past year, both involving women living alone in isolated units, both occurring late at night, both showing the same methodical approach to entry. In neither case had the intruder actually gotten inside. He said they had a theory that whoever this was enjoyed the hunt more than the capture, that watching the fear, testing the doors, hearing the panic in a 911 call might be the entire point. I still think about that sometimes, about the fact that he might have been listening to me beg for help, breathing into my phone, savoring every trembling word. I installed a security system in my new apartment, bought a baseball bat that I keep next to my bed, and I never, ever spend a holiday alone anymore. Some lessons you only need to learn once. Crowds were still spilling out of the park when I finally found a quieter corner to breathe. My friends had already peeled off with their partners, and I just wanted to get home and get my shoes off. I remember feeling that mix of post-fireworks buzz and exhaustion, the kind that makes everything feel slightly unreal, but not in a bad way. I opened my rideshare app, saw the wait time, and leaned against a metal barricade that someone had half crushed earlier in the night. The air still smelled like burnt powder and kettle corn, and people were laughing, stumbling, calling out to each other as they tried to reconnect in the chaos. I was sober, just tired, and trying to shake off the leftover adrenaline from the fireworks. My driver's car was listed as a charcoal sedan, pretty common, so I kept checking the little GPS dot, creeping closer. A few minutes passed before a charcoal sedan rolled up to the curb with its window halfway down. The driver leaned over and called my name, calmly, like he'd said it 1,000 times. That threw me off more than anything, because I hadn't even seen him clearly yet. He had a baseball cap pulled low, and the streetlights were doing that annoying strobe effect as people walked in front of us, blocking the glow every few seconds. I glanced at the car, same color, same make, and for a second I almost opened the door, but something nudged me to double-check the plate. It was close, incredibly close, but the last digit wasn't right. One number off, not a typo off, like a completely different digit. I asked him about it, trying to keep my voice casual. His reaction snapped something inside me. Instead of just correcting me or explaining, he sighed loudly and waved me toward the door like I was being dramatic. He muttered something about the street being a disaster and how he couldn't sit here all night, and his tone carried this irritated edge that felt too personal for someone I'd never met. People were squeezing past us, brushing against my shoulders, and the noise around me felt heavier suddenly. Not louder, just harder to filter. I took one step back, then another, and his expression shifted in this way I can only describe as annoyed that I wasn't cooperating with whatever script he thought I was following. He tapped the door impatiently and told me to get in unless I wanted to be stuck there another hour. Before I could even answer, another charcoal sedan rolled up behind him and idled. This driver rolled his window down and called my name too, but his voice matched the one on the app's profile clip. He held up his phone, screen glowing with my ride details. The first driver looked into his mirror, then shot me this sharp look, like I'd inconvenienced him on purpose. Without another word, he jerked the wheel and sped off, headlights off, slipping through the crowd in a way no sober person would ever attempt. A couple walking nearby jumped out of the way, shouting after him, but he didn't slow down. He just disappeared into the mess of brake lights and drifting smoke like he'd practiced that exit 100 times. I got into the real car, still trying to process how close I'd come to stepping into the wrong one. My actual driver, a guy named Marcus, kept glancing at me in the mirror with this concerned look, the kind you give someone who's clearly rattled but trying not to make a scene. He asked if everything was all right, and I told him what happened in a short, jumbled version. The moment I mentioned the missing digit on the plate, he tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He said other passengers earlier in the night had mentioned cars lingering near pickup zones, matching descriptions almost perfectly. Same make, same color, sometimes even the same aftermarket decals. Hearing that made my whole body tense up. The streets were choked with people leaving the fireworks, and every minute we crawled forward gave me more space in my head to replay the man's tone, the way he said my name with too much familiarity, like he'd practiced it. By the time we cleared the traffic and merged into quieter blocks, the excitement of the holiday felt like it belonged to a different day entirely. I kept checking the rear window even when I knew logically he wasn't behind us. Marcus tried to lighten the mood by talking about his plans to quit driving after the holiday rush, but even he couldn't hide how uneasy he seemed. At one point he said something that stuck with me. If someone's going through all that trouble to mimic a ride, they're not doing it for anything good. The thought of that made my throat tighten. I rolled down the window a crack to get some cold air, but even the breeze didn't help settle my nerves. Every charcoal sedan we passed made my chest tighten like I was seeing the same car again and again. When we reached my street, Marcus didn't pull away right after dropping me off. He waited until I was through the gate of my building before waving goodbye, something drivers almost never do anymore. Inside my apartment, the silence felt heavier than usual. My neighbors were still out celebrating, so the hallway was empty, and every little creak sounded too sharp. I put on water for tea just to have some noise, but even that didn't stop the jittery feeling running through me. My phone buzzed with a safety notification from the rideshare app, asking if I'd arrived safely. I clicked yes, then hesitated, staring at the little customer support icon. Part of me felt ridiculous reporting something that hadn't technically happened, but the other part kept replaying the man's impatient tone and how quickly he tore off once the real car arrived. Eventually, I hit the report button and typed everything out. I didn't expect much, maybe a generic response. But a few minutes later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman from the company's safety team asking if she could ask a few follow-up questions. Her voice was steady, but there was a seriousness underneath it that made me sit down. She confirmed that the car I described didn't match any registered driver in the area. Worse, 2 other riders had called earlier about similar incidents, though in their cases the fake drivers bailed before anyone could confront them. Hearing that made my palms go damp in an instant. The woman gently suggested I contact the police because the behavior matched a pattern they'd been alerted to. I called the non-emergency line because I didn't want to blow things out of proportion. But the moment I described the missing digit on the plate and the way the guy had said my name, the dispatcher's tone sharpened. She transferred me to an officer who asked for every detail I could remember. The cap, the angle he held his arm on the window frame, the way he kept glancing at the sidewalk instead of at me. While I talked, I paced around my living room, stopping every time I realized I didn't actually want to be near the windows. The officer said they had already increased patrols near the event area after multiple women reported drivers acting strangely or circling the same blocks repeatedly. He asked if I could come in the next day to give a formal statement. I agreed, even though I barely slept after hanging up. At the station the following afternoon, the detective I spoke with laid out photos of different sedans, each one circled on maps showing their paths around the event zone. He pointed out patterns I wouldn't have noticed. Cars looping the same alleys, pulling into lots, then backing out immediately, hovering at pickup points with no assigned ride. He didn't say it outright, but I could tell from his expression that my encounter wasn't unusual that night. The fireworks had drawn out tens of thousands of people, and many were tipsy, distracted, or separated from their groups. Perfect conditions for someone looking to blend in and pick a target. The detective said one woman had actually gotten into a fake car earlier, but managed to jump out at a stoplight when she realized the driver was taking a route that didn't match her app. Walking home after giving my statement, I kept replaying how easily things could have gone in a different direction for me. The detective had explained that these men, or maybe it was just one group pretending to be multiple drivers, had refined their approach by watching how real rideshares interacted with riders. The greeting by name, the quick wave, the casual impatience. They had the script nailed down. That detail haunted me more than anything. They weren't improvising. They were practicing, planning, perfecting. My street felt different as I approached my building. Still familiar, but edged with the thought that danger doesn't always show up wearing something obvious or theatrical. Sometimes it looks exactly like what you're expecting. A few days later, the detective called to tell me they'd made progress. Surveillance caught the same sedan from my description weaving recklessly through a pedestrian crossing not long after it left me at the curb. They traced the car to an abandoned property on the outskirts of the city, but whoever had been using it had cleared out fast. No personal items, no gear, just a stack of fake plates in a cardboard box and tire marks in the dirt. The detective told me very plainly that I'd made the right call by stepping back and waiting for plate confirmation. He said that small hesitation likely kept me from becoming part of their pattern. I still think about that night whenever I leave a crowded event. How one missing digit saved me from stepping into a car, meant for someone who wasn't supposed to come back. Staying home alone that December felt strange from the start, mostly because the house always felt louder when it was just me. My wife and kids had flown out 2 days earlier to visit her parents, and I stayed behind because of work. I remember thinking that the place seemed bigger without them, like the walls carried every little sound a bit too clearly. That night, the temperature had dropped fast, and the air inside felt sharper than usual, even with the heater running. I'd gone to bed later than I should have, scrolling through old photos of the kids decorating the tree the week before. Nothing felt out of the ordinary when I finally drifted off. just the usual quiet of a cold night settling in around me. Sometime deep in the night, a noise pulled me out of sleep. A steady series of crunches, the kind snow makes when someone heavy walks across it. At first, I brushed it off as a deer or maybe a stray dog wandering near the yard. But it kept going, slow and deliberate, like whatever was out there wasn't just passing by. I sat up in the dark, listening, and the rhythm of the steps felt too purposeful to ignore. The sound moved closer to my bedroom window, not rushing, not stopping, just approaching like someone who knew exactly where they were going. I grabbed my phone and opened the porch camera feed out of habit, expecting to catch a glimpse of whatever it was. Instead of the usual grainy view of the front steps, the screen showed nothing but a cloudy blur, like the lens had been smeared with something thick. Not fog, not condensation, something that looked dragged across the glass by fingertips. That was the moment my chest tightened in a way I hadn't felt since the night my son wandered out of bed with a fever years ago. I got up quietly and moved through the hallway, every floorboard sounding louder than it ever had. The wind had kicked up outside, brushing frost against the siding, but beneath it I could still make out faint shifts in the snow. I stopped at the top of the stairs, trying to figure out if calling the police right then would help or just waste precious minutes. Then the testing started. A soft push against the kitchen window followed by a faint rattle of the latch. Whoever it was took their time, moving from one ground floor window to the next, as if checking them off a list. I could hear the faint scrape of a gloved hand sliding along the glass before each attempt. The pattern was so methodical it made my mouth go dry. I backed into the hallway, keeping the phone against my ear as I finally dialed 911, whispering to the operator while trying not to make any noise that might give away where I was. The minutes stretched, each sound downstairs feeling like it was happening right beside me, and all I could do was wait for help while the intruder circled the house like they had all night to spare. The operator assured me officers were on the way, but with the holiday calls stacking up, she couldn't give me a clear estimate. I stayed crouched at the top of the stairs, listening as the intruder reached the sunroom windows. That one had an old metal frame, and the sound of the person pressing against it carried through the entire house. The way they moved made it feel like they'd studied the layout beforehand, lingering longer at the windows that were easier to unlatch, barely tapping the ones I always kept locked tight. At one point, the movement paused long enough that I thought maybe they'd left, but then a soft thump came from directly beneath me, right by the basement hatch that opened to the backyard. I felt a dull ache pulse through my arms as I pressed myself against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. When the person finally reached the back door, the handle gave a slow metallic creak, as if they were testing how much pressure it would take before it snapped. I kept replaying the smeared camera lens in my head, realizing whoever this was had gotten close enough, calm enough, to touch the camera without fear of being recorded. Every couple of seconds, the intruder stepped away from the door only to return for another attempt, like they were trying to match their movements with passing gusts of wind. The absurd part is that I kept glancing at the thermostat across the room, watching the temperature drop inside the house as if it could tell me how close the person was. I sent my wife a quick text saying everything was fine, even though the last thing I felt was fine. Eventually, the footsteps drifted toward the front of the house again, but this time slower, heavier, like the person wanted me to hear them. They brushed past the living room window, their shadow crossing the faint glow from the street lamp. I couldn't make out the shape clearly, but it was tall, broader than any of my neighbors, and moving with a steadiness that made my throat tighten. Right then, a loud crack sounded outside, not from my house, but from farther up the street. Maybe someone set off a firework, or maybe ice snapped on a branch. Whatever it was, it made the person outside stop. I held my breath and waited for the next sound, but it never came. Instead, the footsteps faded, disappearing into the snow as if they'd simply dissolved into the night. By the time the officers arrived, the house had gone silent again. I met them at the door, trying to explain everything while they swept the yard with their flashlights. The beam caught a full trail of footprints circling the entire property, looping around the porch, the windows, even the garage door. The strangest part was how the tracks ended. They didn't trail off naturally or fade into the distance. They stopped abruptly at the edge of the road, right beside tire marks that cut a deep line through the frozen slush. One of the officers pointed out how clean the prints looked, like the person had been standing there for a long time before walking up to the house. The idea that someone had parked there watching me, hours before even taking a step toward the yard, made my mouth go dry. The officers did one last sweep around the property before heading back to their cruiser, leaving me with their card and a reminder to lock everything down tight. After they pulled away, the house felt colder than before, the kind of cold that sinks into the carpet and settles in the corners. I walked room to room, checking every window again, noticing tiny details I hadn't paid attention to earlier. A faint circle on the glass where a gloved thumb must have pressed, a thin line of melted snow on the inside of the back door frame. Somehow, those small traces felt worse than the noises themselves. They proved the person was confident enough to get right up against the house without hesitating, like they'd been there before, or at least practiced getting close. Sleeping that night wasn't an option. I sat on the couch with the living room lamp on, staring at the faded smear on the porch camera feed as it slowly cleared in the cold. The more I thought about it, the more it bothered me that the camera wasn't smashed or disabled. It was just covered. Someone wanted me blinded, but not alerted. I kept imagining a hand reaching toward the lens, palm first, moving slowly enough for the warmth of the skin to leave streaks across the glass. Maybe they wiped it clean on their clothing afterward. Maybe they didn't care if I saw their handprint. Either way, the idea of someone being inches from my face, separated only by a tiny camera, made it impossible to shake the uneasy buzzing beneath my ribs. When the sun finally came up, I stepped outside to take a better look at the footprints before they disappeared under fresh snowfall. The pattern confirmed exactly what the officers had said. The tracks circled the house in one long, looping trail, doubling back at certain windows like the person had returned to them more than once. What shook me most was how deep the prints were near the porch camera. Whoever stood there had lingered long enough to compress the snow down to a hard, icy ring. The tire marks on the road were still visible too. They ran parallel to the property, stopping right at the point where the tracks began, like the car had been sitting there for hours with a perfect view of my bedroom and living room windows. Since that night, nothing else has happened, and no one was ever identified. The police chalked it up to someone trying random houses because of the holiday travel season, but that explanation doesn't sit right with me. The person outside wasn't guessing. They moved with intention, checking the exact points where my house was most vulnerable. I replaced the camera the next day, added more lights, reinforced the basement hatch. But the thing that sticks with me most is the quiet moment when the footsteps paused directly beneath my bedroom. It felt like they were listening, maybe for me, maybe for movement, maybe for something I'll never understand. The only comfort I've found since then is that they left after that single night, and for reasons I hope never to learn, they didn't decide to come back. That December had been one of those months where everything felt packed and noisy. School deadlines, holiday plans, friends trying to squeeze in hangouts before everyone scattered. I'd gone to my friend Talia's house that evening to finish a history project and decompress a little. Her place sat a few blocks from mine, close enough that my parents didn't mind me walking as long as I texted updates. I remember leaving her porch with this mix of relief and tiredness, the kind that settles behind your eyes after a long day. The air had that prickly winter bite, and every breath came out in soft white clouds that drifted sideways with the wind. Streetlights hummed overhead, casting yellowish halos on the pavement. I pulled my hoodie tighter and kept moving, half lost in thoughts about finals, totally unaware of how fast that night was about to turn strange. The first sign that something wasn't right came from behind me. A quiet engine creeping along at a pace so slow it didn't fit the usual traffic on that street. I remember thinking it might be someone looking for an address, but the van kept matching my steps. When it rolled closer, I noticed the paint was a dull, uneven gray, the kind that looked hand-sprayed, almost chalky under the streetlight. The passenger window slid down just a few inches at first, and then all the way. A man with a round face and a scruffy jaw leaned out. His eyes had this unsettled darting pattern, like he was scanning for something beyond me. He asked where I lived, then said he could give me a lift before I froze out here, dragging the words like he practiced them. Something in the tone, flat but expectant, made me speed up. The van didn't peel off or yell anything. It just slowed even more, as if waiting for me to slip, hesitate, or get close enough to grab. I cut sharply across a yard I knew wasn't fenced, hopped down the other side, and bolted toward a side street that had a row of holiday lights blinking on a balcony. When I glanced back, the van had turned the opposite way, which almost confused me. Maybe they gave up. But that flicker of relief vanished fast when another vehicle, a dark compact car with a loud rattling muffler, entered the street from the far end. It drove past me once, then again, then a third time, this time slower. The windows weren't tinted, but the people inside kept their faces angled downward, only lifting their heads when they reached each corner, like they were trying not to be noticed yet searching at the same time. My house was still several blocks away, and the street I was on suddenly felt too open, too exposed. I ducked into the back lot of a small shop that had closed hours earlier, its metal security gate pulled down and locked. A big green dumpster sat wedged between the building and a brick wall, and I squeezed behind it, crouching low on the cold concrete. The sounds around me sharpened, the hum of the streetlight above, the crunch of gravel under car tires, and then the car stopping nearby. Doors slammed. I heard footsteps entering the alley, slow and deliberate. A beam of light cut across the ground, then swept upward along the brick wall. Another beam joined it. One of the men called out, his voice echoing slightly, asking where the girl in the hoodie went. Hearing that exact phrase sent a jolt through me. There was no way it was coincidence. They weren't just looking for someone. They were looking for me. The men didn't rush or stumble around like people who were confused or angry. Their movements had this unnerving confidence, like they already knew the layout of the alley and just needed to narrow down the hiding spots. One of them had a flashlight fitted with a long, narrow beam that sliced clean lines across the pavement. The other used a wider, bluish light that made the bricks glow faintly. They whispered to each other in short bursts, not enough for me to understand, but enough to tell they weren't improvising. At one point, the man with the narrow flashlight tapped the dumpster with his knuckles, 3 quick knocks, before sweeping the beam behind it. I pressed myself as small as I could, pulling my hood forward to cover the small patch of hair that wasn't hidden. The beam passed so close to my shoes that the rubber on the toes lit up. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing and the soft, static sound of their footsteps moving farther down the alley. Then one of them said something that tightened every muscle in my body. Check behind the pallets next. There were wooden pallets stacked near the back door of the shop, and from where I was, I could see the gap between them and the wall. If they searched there and didn't find anything, it meant their next logical step would be to backtrack, straight toward the dumpster. I caught a glimpse of one of the flashlights reflecting off a window above me, and that faint, distorted reflection made everything feel unreal, like I was watching myself from another angle. I remember gripping the edge of the dumpster with my hand and feeling tiny chips of paint flaking under my fingers. Just as their steps circled closer again, a distant siren echoed from the main road. It wasn't close enough to be alarming, but close enough that the men paused. One of them muttered something sharp and irritated, and the other swung his light toward the street as if checking for patrol cars. The siren grew louder for a moment before fading, but the timing was enough to throw them off. They began retreating toward their car, still alert, still scanning the shadows, but now with this uneasy hurry in their walk. When they reached the mouth of the alley, the car headlights flicked on, briefly illuminating the brick walls in harsh white. The vehicle rolled slowly down the block, the occupants staring out both sides of the windows one last time before turning the corner. I stayed crouched behind the dumpster much longer than I probably needed to, aware that the cold from the concrete had started creeping through my jeans. My legs kept tensing and relaxing on their own, like my body couldn't decide whether to run or stay frozen in place. When I finally stood up, the world felt too quiet. No cars passing, no people walking dogs, not even the usual wind rattling the loose gutter above the shop. I peeked around the corner of the building toward the street and saw nothing but an empty intersection, the crosswalk light blinking its red hand slowly, over and over. I knew I had only a small window of safety, so I slipped out of the lot and took the back route home, cutting through yards and narrow paths I hadn't walked in years because they were always too dim. That night, they felt like the safest options I had. By the time I reached my street, the cold had settled deep into my clothes, but I barely registered it. What I kept replaying instead was the way the men had used my hoodie as a descriptor, like they'd already been watching before the van even showed up. My house came into view between two leafless trees, their branches stretching across the front yard like thin arms. One window on the second floor glowed faintly. My mom always left a lamp on when she knew I was walking home. That small patch of warm light hit me harder than I expected. I hurried up the porch steps, unlocked the door as quietly as I could, and slipped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon tea and old wood, familiar and grounding, but my nerves were still strung tight enough that every creak felt amplified. I didn't tell my parents right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because something about the whole encounter felt surreal. Like if I started talking too quickly, I'd jumble the details or sound dramatic. I went straight to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and tried to slow my breathing. From my window, I could see the faint glow of the street lamp outside and a slice of the sidewalk. For a long time, I watched that empty patch of pavement, half expecting something to turn the corner again. My phone buzzed with a message from Talia asking if I'd gotten home. I remember typing, "Yeah, all good," even though I didn't feel steady at all. Part of me was worried that saying what happened out loud would make it more real. The next morning, the local news ran a segment that made everything snap into place. A reporter stood outside a shopping center decorated with plastic reindeer and garlands, talking about an investigation into an organized group targeting young women walking alone after dark. They mentioned unmarked vans, mismatched license plates, multiple coordinated vehicles, and suspects using holiday crowds and early sunsets as cover. I sat on the couch staring at the screen while the reporter listed streets only a few blocks from where I'd been the night before. When she said law enforcement had disrupted part of the operation, but were looking for more individuals who fled, a chill threaded through me. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet understanding that the men searching that alley hadn't been random predators. They were part of something bigger, something deliberate. Later that day, I finally told my parents everything. My mom listened with this silent intensity, her hand covering her mouth. My dad kept asking for small details, positions of cars, which direction the van came from, how many voices I heard, like he could reconstruct the entire night if he gathered enough pieces. They contacted the police, who took the report seriously, but admitted they were already overwhelmed with similar tips. Still, an officer assured us they had patrols circling the area more frequently. For weeks afterward, I stuck to well-lit routes, refused to walk alone after dark, and avoided the alley behind the shop entirely. Even now, years later, when I hear a slow vehicle crawling along a quiet street, something in me tightens for a moment before logic catches up. I never learned who those men were or how long they'd been watching the neighborhood, but I know this much. If I hadn't trusted that first flicker of instinct, I might not have made it home at all.